Hey fans, I hope you're all enjoying the program tonight.
You will be a weapon. You will be a minister of death, praying for war.
If you're not inside, you are outside, okay?
Sir, I heard it was the best, sir.
It is the best.
The only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
All right, welcome everyone back from the weekend to another episode of the Weekly SITREP. Kyle, how was Girl Scout cookies? You cleared the inventory?
I think we're down to I'm only taking a $30 hit. But
So $30 net loss for all the business school students out there.
yeah, but that's okay. It's all technically donations or something. But it's a lot of work.
How much were you trying to explain to your daughters how to set up and run a business?
I tried. There's actually a lot of rules that go into doing it, and when I've tried to do that, I've got my wife has basically told me that everything I suggested violates every one of the rules you're supposed to follow. So she's I've kind of not done that. Their business model is already really successful. So
Oh, I'm sure it is. Yeah, I see them everywhere. They're all over campus here at Penn.
Yeah.
So this week we will talk a little bit about a couple of foreign affairs topics, and we're pretty excited. We have Tomasz Grzywaczewski, who has spent considerable amount of time in the Eastern Bloc. He's originally from Poland, but has spent extensive time covering the war in Ukraine on the ground. And we'll be talking with him about the tragic news of Alexei Navalny's passing, or assassination, really, and then the recent developments on the front line in Ukraine. We'll then jump into a discussion about some financial metrics, and Kyle will do a lot better than me at explaining exactly what's happening in the stock market and how we can pretty simply understand that. We'll walk into the favorite discussion from Kyle about realtors and the real estate market in general, and the demise of easy real estate earnings, and then finally finish up with a brief discussion about airlines, which for anyone that's an aspiring consultant, you will get to know that topic very well. So Tom, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell everyone about what you've been doing, and I know you've been making some films and kind of talk about what you've actually had going on over there in Ukraine, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, hello. So first of all, thank you very much for hosting me. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here with you. And I am a war correspondent, war journalist, and documentary filmmaker, and I've been covering the situation on the Ukrainian front line since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, so since the February 24th, 2022. However, I had been going regularly to Ukraine, to Donbas, since 2015, when this war has started. I'd like to emphasize it, that because very often we refer to the war in Ukraine as it has been lasting for past 2 years, but in fact it has been lasting for already almost 10 years, because this war has started from the illicit annexation of Crimean Peninsula by Russia in March and April 2014, and from the first invasion on Donbas in 2014. Of course, for a couple of years, the war was partially, let's say, frozen. There was some kind of truce that was called Minsk II Agreement, Minsk II Accords. So the conflict was partially frozen. I said partially because even during this low intensity phase, there were shellings on the front line. For instance, when I was there, in 2017, there were still some mortar shellings. There were trenches. There were desolated villages. So there was a regular front line over there in eastern Ukraine. However, of course, in 2022, this conflict changed its specifics towards this full-scale war that we've been observing for the last 2 years. And I'm also, as I mentioned, I'm a documentary filmmaker. So my last movie titled Erase the Nation is dedicated to Russian war crimes against Ukrainian cultural heritage and Ukrainian national identity. I was exploring different cases of war crimes against cultural sites like museums, monuments, archaeological excavations, but also against people of culture. So people of culture, artists who are suffering because of these aggression. So I mainly focus on the war crimes. However, I'm also trying to observe the broader picture and delivering some analytical pieces about the geopolitics of Russia, about Central Eastern Europe, but also about transatlantic relations between Europe and the US.
Just to see what you've been doing over there, I follow you on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best place for people to see constantly what you're up to. We wanted to talk just briefly before Ukraine and pay tribute a little bit to the brave people in Russia that are fighting against the tyranny of Vladimir Putin, namely Alexei Navalny, who was murdered this week in a penal colony north of the Arctic Circle. Tom, can you explain a little bit about who is Alexei Navalny and why was this such an important kind of shocking event for the people in Russia and for those in Russia that are trying to maybe hope for a better governmental solution?
Definitely, Alexei Navalny was a symbol of opposition against Vladimir Putin. He was one of the most fierce critics of current regime in Kremlin, and he has been advocating for another Russia, more liberal Russia for years. And Putin has been already trying to get rid of him, trying to poison him. And after these attempts of killing him, Alexei Navalny decided to come back to Russia. And immediately after coming back to Russia, he was arrested and imprisoned in different can call it colonies or labor camps somewhere in Siberia. And he's extremely prominent figure, especially in the West. He's, as I said, like a symbol, like iconic person that is embodying this opposition against Putin. And even though he was imprisoned, very often it was considered that Putin is not going to kill him because he is too important for Western leaders. So even though he can keep him imprisoned, even though he can torture him and deprive him of fundamental rights, even imprisoned, like for instance, putting him into a solitary confinement for hundreds of days, he will not cross this red line of killing him. And it has changed last Friday when Alexei Navalny died in the prison. Of course, we don't know the details of what happened. Russian authorities only delivered like a very brief statement that he lost consciousness during a walk and he died. So of course we don't know what happened. His body is still kept by authorities, and supposedly it's not going to be given to Navalny's family in next days. Maybe even authorities decide to keep his body until the elections, because I think it's worth remembering that there are elections in Russia scheduled in March.
So those elections, Navalny, I know, once ran for the mayor of Moscow, got 25%, which was shocking given the fact that he's not supposed to win. But when you talk about elections in Russia, what does that even, I mean, is there any chance that anything happens other than what Vladimir Putin says is going to happen or wants to happen? Is there any kind of opposition in Russia?
In fact, there is no opposition. I mean, the outcomes are pretty clear, and this is something I think worth emphasizing, that there are no prospects for any democratic change in Russia. The organized opposition doesn't exist in Russia. Of course, there are some individuals, but most of them are already imprisoned, or they fled Russia because they were threatened and they were afraid that they might be killed. Like, for instance, I don't know, Nikolai Khodorkovsky or Garry Kasparov, the famous chess master. So the most prominent figures are or imprisoned or abroad. So Navalny was the one who decided, okay, even though the Putin's regime was trying to poison me, to kill me, I make a decision to come back to Russia. And of course, he must have been aware that he would go to the prison, and it happened. I suppose that his idea was to stay in Russia and to become like this imprisoned symbol of opposition.
And like a Nelson Mandela, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the comparison that I've heard. Yeah,
exactly. Like the one who is advocating for civil rights from the prison. However, the difference between what happened in South Africa and in Russia is that in South Africa, the apartheid regime was waning at that time. In Russia, the Putin's regime is getting stronger. I know it's maybe counterintuition, because very often media says, and also the politicians, that sanctions are working. Yes, they are working. The economic situation is complicated in Russia, and in the long term, the war waged against Ukraine, combined with Western sanctions, will force Putin's regime to withdraw. But unfortunately, in short term, it doesn't work like that. So Putin regime is extremely strong. He eliminated another war criminal, Yevgeny Prigozhin, so the chief commander owner of Wagner mercenary group. He was killed, supposedly killed in September.
Yeah, he was like shot out of the sky, right?
I mean, there was a plane crash. I mean, I said allegedly because, of course, we don't have a clear evidence, but
sure. And for those that don't remember, Prigozhin was the one, Wagner mercenary group. There was kind of some confusion. All of a sudden, we all woke up, and it seemed like there was some sort of coup. And from what I've heard, and you can comment on this a little bit better than I can, that there was some speculation that maybe Putin was getting uneasy with the power that Prigozhin had. Prigozhin thought, hey, I'm going to make a move. I'm dead anyway. Maybe I can save my family and my men. He kind of did this. I mean, it wasn't really even an assault on Moscow. He just kind of turned his military vehicles. I think they might have shot down one helicopter, and then they brokered a truce. And then all of a sudden, Prigozhin, 2 months later, like you said, there was a plane crash, and it seemed by all accounts like he was shot out of the sky with an anti-aircraft missile. But is that kind of an accurate description of what happened with Prigozhin?
Yeah, I think so. As I said, we don't have any solid evidence showing what really happened. But yeah, Prigozhin, even though he was a thug, he was a war criminal. He was a really bad guy. So I don't want to compare Prigozhin to Navalny, to be clear on that. Yeah, Prigozhin was like a criminal, and Wagner's mercenaries were responsible for one of the most outrageous cases of atrocities committed in Ukraine. However, Prigozhin was somehow dangerous for Putin. There was this attempt, coup d'etat, I think it was June, it was called March on Moscow. We don't know exactly why he decided to do that, but of course he betrayed Putin. And finally, he paid the final price, so he was killed. By the way, it's pretty shocking that Prigozhin decided to embark on the plane. I mean, if I were Prigozhin, I wouldn't have go to any plane knowing that Putin is trying to kill me, because very often Russian authorities, I would say Russian authorities like to eliminate their enemies by taking down the planes. So yeah, so it was like it was a pure stupidity by Prigozhin. Of course, the case with Navalny is different. But still, I think that Moscow is sending a very clear signal to international community, to Western states, to NATO, but also to the people in Russia, that no one who would try to oppose Putin can be safe. And it is also quite emblematic that Navalny was killed at the same time when security conference in Munich, that is, I think, the most important event focusing on international security, at least for, let's say, NATO countries, started. So, so the global leaders are meeting for this conference, trying to discuss what to do with Russia, discussing the threats for our common security. And at this very moment, Navalny is killed. So this is how
it's
Russia.
Pretty brazen. It's very on the nose. It's shocking, really. I think, like you said, people didn't expect for him to actually kill Navalny, right?
Yeah, because Navalny was too famous in the West, even though, of course, with all due respect to Navalny's commitment, and of course, saying it once again, he was a political prisoner and he was killed by Putin, even though I am slightly critical about Navalny's political view, because when you try to scrutinize his political career, in the past, he was rather a nationalist or even Russian imperialist. In 2014, he was supporting annexation of Crimean Peninsula. He delivered pretty famous, let's say, statement or sentence saying that Crimea is not a sandwich that can be passed from one hand to another, and because it has been already taken by Russia, it should have stayed within Russian state. And later, he reversed the statement. He said that Crimea is Ukrainian, but it's also worth mentioning that he also got some, let's say, racist statement. He was talking badly about people from Caucasus, and people from Caucasus are treated in Russia as like second category people. They are often called in Russian chorny. Chorny means black, but black like in the very bad.
It's a bad, right? They are.
Black
very derogatory.
Black is
a very derogatory term.
It's a very derogatory term, and because in fact people from Caucasus got a more like black face, they are called blacks. So the people who are like worse educated, poor, like this second category citizens. And Navalny was speaking against the people from Caucasus and from Central Asia. And from what I've learned scrutinizing his career, he was advocating for very strong Russia. Of course, he was fighting Putin regime. He was claiming that it is a kleptocracy, that there is a huge corruption in Russian authorities.
Yeah, he posted all the pictures of the palaces, right? I mean, he put a bunch of YouTube videos up of oligarchs' palaces, yachts. I think it made Putin very uncomfortable, but maybe this is an interesting, I mean, it might be an interesting segue into Ukraine that, you know, it makes me a little bit, you know, it's kind of sad to consider that, like, that Putin has killed the most liberal hope. If Putin fell today, right, there's not a Nelson Mandela waiting in the wings, right?
In fact, unfortunately, there is no anyone. However, I think it is worth remembering about two other political prisoners that are still alive. And one of them is Vladimir Kara-Murza. He is a prominent journalist, also a politician. He was a protege affiliated with Boris Nemtsov, another opposition leader who was killed by Putin in 2015. And Vladimir Kara-Murza, has been sentenced to 25 years in prison on charges of state treason and spreading defamation about Russian army. And like openly speaking, Vladimir Kara-Murza, he was claiming that Russian army was committing war crimes in Ukraine. He was one of the leaders of anti-war committee. So he was like openly advocating for Ukraine and and against this war waged by Russia. And just for saying that, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. It's even even longer term than the one that to which Navalny was sentenced. And he's still in prison. And Kara-Murza, he was also engaged in creating Magnitsky Act. And the Magnitsky Act, it was a special law that was introduced by the US, and its aim was to put on US sanctions list people in Russia that were responsible for different, maybe not war crimes, but infringements of human rights. And this Magnitsky Act, it was introduced, I think, in 2012, if I am.
It sounds right. Yeah, under President Obama.
Yeah, I'm not going into details because, of course, this Magnitsky Act is much more complicated. But this was one of the first signs of changing attitude towards Putin Russia by the US. So it was a very important step towards trying to sanction the people in Russia who are responsible for infringements of human rights. And Vladimir Kara-Murza was one of the people who were working on this Magnitsky Act. So he was like a prominent, as I said, both journalist and I would say maybe not a politician, rather a policymaker. Right now he's in prison. Another person worth mentioning is Ilya Yashin. He's also Russian opposition politician. He was directly engaged in different political activities in Russia, and he was sentenced to about 8 years of prison, also for defamation of Russian army. I mean, he was accused of spreading fake news about Russian army because he claimed that Russian army committed war crimes in Bucha by killing civilians. And on these circumstances, as I said, he was persecuted and imprisoned. So right now, these two individuals, Ilya Yashin and Vladimir Kara-Murza, they are still in prison, and they can stay there like for years or maybe.
Yeah, until Putin.
In Russia, it may be like even the life sentence.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to realize exactly what the kind of society that Putin is creating or has created, really. This is not new. I know we talked about the Magnitsky Act and the change that we saw in 2012. That was a shift from when we were all very hopeful that Putin might be someone that was a little bit more of a Western reform-minded person. Very evident that he's not. We know, Kyle and I know on the page, there's plenty of people that wanted to defend when Tucker Carlson went over and interviewed Putin. And for as much as I completely support the idea that we hear what Putin has to say, it has to be done critically. And in that interview, Navalny was not mentioned, war crimes were not mentioned. It was completely cleared through Putin. Evan Gershkovich was lightly mentioned, but this is the world that Putin has created. And for people that think that Putin is defending Western values or that there's some sort of world in which that we can have a Western society where any dissent is punished by, like you said, life in prison. Alexei Navalny, escaped one poisoning, was brave enough to go back and face, practice civil disobedience and go to prison, and it cost him his life. And it's amazing that people will think otherwise. But Tom, I wanted to ask you a little bit about now moving from the political scene in Russia to the war that Russia is waging against Ukraine. You've spent a lot of time over there throughout the entire country. What does the current state of affairs look like? I know that Russia recently reported that they've captured Avdiivka, if I'm saying that correctly. But what do you see as the current state of affairs, and what are kind of the outcomes that we can expect now, almost 2 years into this war?
So like giving some bridge between internal Russian politics and the state of the world for right now, I think it's also worth mentioning one more political killing, because today the Russian pilot who defected to Ukraine with an Mi-5 helicopter, it was a special operation of Ukrainian secret services. They managed to convince one of the pilots to flee from Russia with the helicopter, and this pilot was today shot to death in Spain. So you can see these long hands of Russian secret services, that they are chasing their defectors, the traitors from the point of view of Kremlin, all over the world. So even if you're not in Russia, you still can be threatened, you still can be killed. And it's like, as I said, it's like long-lasting Russian practice of killing political opponents abroad. Yeah, and coming back to the Ukrainian front line, indeed, the Russian forces managed to finally capture the Avdiivka city. That was in fact a fortress, because Avdiivka city, it's this town, it lies on the, like say, on the outskirts of Donetsk, and it was an Ukrainian military, as a fortress, since 2014, because in 2014 pro-Russian separatists accompanied by Russian forces were trying to capture this town, and they failed at that time. And and Ukrainian forces built there like very sophisticated system of different trenches and field fortifications. Also there is located a very big coal processing plant that was turned into another stronghold, pretty similar to famous Azovstal plant in Mariupol. And Russian forces have been trying to capture Avdiivka since February 24th, 2022. But the battle, like the main battle of Avdiivka, started in October last year. At that time, Russian forces started skirmishing Avdiivka, and finally they made it. So they forced Ukrainian army to withdraw from Avdiivka. So Avdiivka is now occupied, and of course it poses some problems for Ukrainian army, because Avdiivka was called Gate to Donetsk. So, like trying to draw the super optimistic scenario, if in the future Ukrainian army is willing to recapture Donetsk, Avdiivka will be the starting point, because it was really, really close to the city of Donetsk itself. And currently, like this plan is no longer on the table, because Avdiivka is occupied by Russians. However, it also shows that unfortunately, Ukrainian army is running low on the artillery ammunition. And that's the biggest challenge, because Russians are capable of providing huge amounts of artillery ammunition, a huge amount of military equipment, a huge amount of manpower. This is like it's the war of attrition. And Russian state can mobilize like a huge number of resources. They've already change their economics toward the war economy. So they are producing new tanks, new APVs, they are producing new artillery systems, they are buying artillery ammunition from North Korea, they are buying drones, and supposedly also ballistic missiles from Iran. And Ukraine is getting tired, is getting exhausted. And after capturing of Avdiivka, Russian forces start offensive on the other parts of the front line. Like today, there are like 4, even 5 parts of the front line when Russians are attempting to break Ukrainian defense lines. So there is offensive in the south, close to the city of Zaporozhye, around the village of Robotyne. There is some kind of pocket that was liberated by Ukrainian army during Ukrainian offensive in summer 2023. But right now, Russians are trying to recapture this land. There's another offensive going west of Avdiivka, so Russian forces are trying to push forward. Another offensive in the small town of Marinka, and another close to Bakhmut. So on the entire front line, we observe a massive Russian offensive. And that's a pretty big challenge. I think that even today in New York Times, in one of the articles, said that this is one of the most dangerous moments of the entire war. That Russians really can break Ukrainian defense lines. I talked with some soldiers, and I would say the situation is not so serious. However, the pressure is rising. So Russians are constantly put more pressure on the front line. And I think they believe that in a long term, they will manage to break this defense lines somewhere. And when they break it, they can try to push forward and capture like more parts of eastern Ukraine. And of course, the crucial is what will Western countries going to do. That's the most, and particularly the US, of course, because
when we think about right now, the fact that, like you said, the optimistic scenario, right, is Avdiivka goes back. I mean, that the entire total victory for Ukraine, is very difficult, right? Just to be realistic, to push Russia out in the near term, at least, from eastern Ukraine. When you talk to people in Ukraine right now, what is the hope, given the situation on the ground? Hopefully more support does come, and I think that we might see that soon, hopefully. But given the situation on the ground, what do Ukrainians see as the maybe realistic outcomes or the best case outcomes right now?
It's a very challenging question because, of course, a lot of Ukrainians claim that they will make it to liberate all occupied territories, including Donbas and Crimean Peninsula. However, I also heard voices that this scenario is not realistic anymore. That for now, the best outcome would be to keep the territories, like to effectively defend the territories that are currently controlled by Ukraine. However, I think that a lot of Ukrainian soldiers they are bracing for a long war, and they believe that if they got the support from Western countries, they can survive the Russian offensive that's going on right now, and that Ukraine may start its own offensive next year. However, without Western assistance, I think it is absolutely impossible. And right now, like, the main battlefield is not there on the ground. I mean, of course, their soldiers are fighting and dying every day. Like every day, hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers are being killed or seriously injured. However, for now, the most important battle is a political battle. It's trying to convince both the US and European countries that this long-term support is indispensable to let Ukraine defend its independence, but also to defeat Russia. But this is also interesting that this is, I think, a very big problem that Western countries, I mean NATO countries, in total, have failed to define what victory in this war means. So
yeah, there's not a clear. I mean,
exactly,
even today,
clear goal. I mean, what means the victory? Like liberating all Ukrainian territories? I don't know, demolishing Russian army, or even demolishing Russian statehood. So,
yeah, there was an op-ed this morning in the Wall Street Journal that talked about this, how President Trump hasn't really said anything about what he would do if he was in office, other than he'd end the war in 24 hours. And President Biden has been very ambiguous about what the actual goal of the aid is, saying at times he's had to walk back his statements, things like, you know, Putin cannot remain in power, and then walking that back to then saying, well, we're not committing to a regime change, obviously, to now kind of saying we would like Ukraine to win, but we're not really sure what exactly the point is, right? And I think that ambiguity is really hard. That makes the war very difficult to fight.
Absolutely, because we can't deliver also public opinion a clear outcome. And this is also like a communication problem within NATO member state societies. That, like, you know, citizens of the US or in Europe, like, we know that we spend a bunch of money to support Ukraine. So people have this like rightful, they rightfully want to know how long are we going to spend this money and what's the outcome gonna be. And politicians fail to communicate it to the society. So that's why I think the support for Ukraine is waning. And this is not like a new discussion. When I made an interview with General Ben Hodges, it was in June or May. He said exactly this: like, we need to define what victory is. Let's talk about what we would like to achieve. It was like almost a year ago, and the months are passing by, and we still don't know what is the victory. For Ukrainian people, the answer is very often clear. Yes, we'd like to liberate our compatriots who are occupied by Russia. We'd like to liberate people who are on daily basis imprisoned, forcefully deported to Russia. We would like to regain our land, and we'd like to regain our people who are enslaved there. But for the Western states, it's much more complicated to answer to this question. And unfortunately, Ukrainian people are also getting wary of what's happening in the front line. Like, we also need to remember that Ukraine is losing on this during this war not only resources, it's also like physically losing people. The demographics of Ukraine is going down. There are estimations that Ukraine may lose about 8 to 10 million people because of the Russian invasion. Of course, not only the people who were killed, but the refugees.
Right, there's a lot of people that
left
leave
the country and decided to stay abroad.
And it started with only about, I mean, Ukraine was a country of what, 40 million people to begin the war? So a quarter of the population. It's like America losing almost, it's like almost 80 million people, I guess 70 million people leaving the United States. It's very difficult to imagine that. And
exactly, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers were seriously wounded. Some of them lost their limbs. There are thousands of soldiers, but also civilians suffering from PTSD or other traumas. Another estimation says that about 10 million of Ukrainian citizens suffer from psychological disorders related to the war. So when we are looking at the Ukrainian society, the picture is horrifying. We got the nation that is traumatized, the nation that was deprived of one quarter of the citizens, the nation where hundreds of thousands of people were or killed or injured. So that's the problem. This is this human face of war of attrition that Russia is waging against Ukraine. And of course, Russia is also losing their soldiers. Approximately 300,000, maybe 400,000 of soldiers were or killed or injured. But still, the population of Russia is about 140 million people. So it's way
A lot bigger.
lot bigger than Ukrainian population. So these are extremely serious problems of Ukraine right now. And to change the situation on the battlefield, Ukraine should be provided with hundreds of thousands or even millions of artillery ammunition, with fighter jets, with long-range guided missiles, like with the abundance of armaments and munition. And we don't see a clear perspective that this military equipment is going to be delivered to Ukraine. Like this, we talked about security conference in Munich, and there were like discussions, negotiations, but not clear outcomes.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, that Russia is used to wage long-lasting wars. This is also Russian historical experience. I remember that in summer 2022, I posted a tweet saying that we shouldn't be too optimistic about that this war is gonna end soon. That even though that Russia failed to capture Kiev, that was defeated in the different battles, still the problem with Russia is that Russian historical experience teaches them that Russia can, at the beginning, lose the war, even for years, but finally it is vast enough, determined enough, and governed in autocratic system that lets Russia, after failures, to finally win the war. It happened during Second World War. It also happened at the beginning of 19th century during a Napoleon's war. So yeah. I think this is a Russian historical perspective. Yeah, we can wait for 5 years, 7 years, 8 years. We are actually neo-totalitarian regime. We can do anything with our citizens. We can send millions of them to the front line. No one is gonna rebel against us. So yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. And Western democratic countries are weak. They're used to comfortable way of living, so they're gonna be tired of supporting Ukraine. And at the end, they say, "Okay."
It's much easier, right? It's much easier when you have that neo-totalitarian regime. We've talked about that. Well, Tom, this has been fascinating. I know we went much longer than we told you.
Yeah.
I hope our listeners, no, it's fantastic. I mean, it's really interesting to hear your perspective, and the experience that you've had there on the front lines is much better than, any opinion that I could have given, for sure. So anyway, want to wish you the best of luck tomorrow. And I know you're going down to DC, and you were just in the European Parliament, so I hope that went well as well. But I will put down in the show notes the links to your LinkedIn, your documentary. If anyone has questions, as you've shown tonight, you're more than happy to discuss this. It's something that you've lived and you've become very emotionally attached to. So I've had plenty of conversations with you, and it's always a real pleasure to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much. And if you have any additional questions, you can also always reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. So I'll be happy to answer. Thank you very much for discussion and giving me a floor to tell you about extremely brave Ukrainian people fighting on the front line, fighting in the trenches for the entire Europe. I'm pretty sure this is a true statement, because if Ukraine fails, Russia is going to push forward towards NATO, all NATO countries, but also giving me a floor to tell a few words about heroic Russian people trying to oppose this neo-totalitarian regime, heroic people like Vladimir Kara-Murza and Ilya Yashin, because of course we commemorate Alexei Navalny, so that we pay tribute to him.
Yeah.
It's also important to remember about these opposition activists who are still alive.
They're doing incredible things. Yeah.
So there are these righteous Russian people, even though they are in prison, try to speak up against the atrocities of the regime.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on, we want to talk about Kyle's favorite topic, that is realtors. What happened to them this week that made you so happy and made them so sad?
I actually don't think I have like something personally like against realtors. Like the idea of a broker, I think is valuable, especially if you're in an area where you don't know anything about, right? But it's just like this continuing crisis with the National Association of Realtors. I remember somebody once asked me on my page, and I was making fun of this. They're like, "Oh, are all the realtors gonna like?" who are they going to, what are they going to sue like each realtor? And I was like, God, there's so many stupid people out there. I'm like, no, they have like a trade association that they all like belong to. It helps them maintain monopolistic like power. Like they're going to sue the shit out of them. And it's just this, it's the kind of like collapse of the National Association of Realtors after this devastating verdict that's going to.
Yeah. So explain exactly. A lot of people buy houses and they've paid fees. Oftentimes you just accept it. You just say, okay, I guess this isn't what it costs to buy a house. But what is it about what the National Association of Realtors has been doing and the fee structure that we've been seeing, commissions, that has caused the ire of courts?
Yeah, it's like they maintain like a lock on a monopoly on basically buying and selling a house, and like they set the rules and like what the commissions are by like one training. So like all the realtors got to go through like their training, right? And they like tell them like don't cut commissions. If you cut commissions, it's a race to the bottom, which is true. And then they lock people out of the like MLS. Like if you don't like pay your dues, you can't access like the MLS. And then
the MLS is the listing of houses.
Yeah, right. Like, and in some places, like Zillow's done a good job of like democratizing it more, but like still, that information is not as current as what you would get on like the MLS. And in like say in like a state like Texas where property sales are not publicly disclosed, like you can't access that information without a realtor. Like for me to like go and like find comps like around here on my own is like really hard because like you don't know what like the current sales are, or like if a house sold, you won't be able to find like the price on Zillow. Instead, you got to like go to a realtor and get like what are the comps, so you're like forced to use them. And so if like you're not a part of the association, or if you try to like if you try to list your own house like for sale by owner, like realtors won't come to it because or like if you reduce the commission or whatever, they won't come to it because it's like they have like agreed upon rules to not basically do that type of business.
And the commission right now is about 3% on each side. 6% total, right? 3% on each side, right?
So,
buyer seller.
Yeah, so like it makes it more expensive for both people, right? So like especially like that 6% gets baked into the price, right? So it's like, okay, if you're looking at a house, right, you can just assume that like it's the actual value of it is like 6% less or whatever, just because of the fact that it's been baked into there. They gotta say, hey, I'm gonna make this amount of money to break even, so they gotta make sure to be able to pay the brokers. There's 3% on each side.
What I saw was they think that this could cut down the number of realtors by almost 50%.
Yeah,
pretty shocking.
Well, like I've met people throughout the years. Like I had like one buddy, and he was like served in the 160th, and like he knew friends who like retired and like just living off their like military pension, and they would like sell like 1 or 2 homes a year, and they would just like whatever pocket that 20 grand or whatever, and they would like that just be like they just do it like twice a year or something, and they wouldn't have the once you combine that their military retirement and pension, like VA disability or whatever, they didn't like have like an incentive to work harder. So it's like, okay, there's just like all these realtors around, how many of them actually provide value?
Yeah, I mean, you sell 2 $400,000 homes, right? You're sitting pretty.
Yeah, here it is.
So-
In many markets, real estate agents can't leave NAR without losing access to the databases of real estate listings. So it's like always revolved around like the database access and
Yeah,
the rules
so
on them.
there's a bunch of these judges that have now said this is monopolistic. It's basically an antitrust case, and
Mhm.
saying the National Association of Realtors has to completely reevaluate how they operate their fee structure. Like you said, you could in theory negotiate that down, but there's the original judge, the original case basically said there's collusion amongst
Yeah.
realtors to make sure that that 6% doesn't go down. Because like you said, it would eventually be you and I would just say, look, we'll sell your house for 2%, or we'd start out
Or
5%.
you'd have some technology model that would come in and
Right, which
allow them to like allow commissions to get undercut significantly,
I
or
know
change
there's
like a la carte.
there's a few that have come and started to do that. I know that people, a lot of the realtors' arguments against things like that is, you don't get you don't get the touch, which is true. I mean, having someone that can really serve you well, but the number of realtors that are doing that versus the number of realtors that are basically just using it as a very easy way to, like you said, make the industry's highest commission, or one of the world's highest commission fee structures, is not a good ratio. So I think there will always be concierge type services, and they will be paid for. And if you need a very good house in a very specific area for a very specific need, or a very specific design, yeah, you're probably not going to want to use technology because it's going to be very difficult to find that. But the 50% of people that aren't doing much, I mean, real estate has also been something that's exploded with zero interest rate. I mean, the amount of vets that have decided that they're real estate professionals, and like you said, make it their entire personality.
You never saw that back in the day. But like I also think that's like it was low interest rates and like tightening like inventory and increasing demand. So, and I don't know. I also just think that like this like technology adoption that has allowed people to like be like more effectively market themselves as a business is probably like appealing to, if you become well known and you're good. I mean, like, why wouldn't you do it? Make good money, and you can scale it. Like, people that have scaled it and now like run like brokerages and do even like some sort of like private equity stuff. It's kind of it's kind of like investment banking, but like super lower, like lower middle market.
Lower, ultra lower middle market.
Yeah, you're just like instead of like buying and selling companies, like you got good at buying and selling, homes.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can always invest much more smartly looking back than looking forward, and I think we all wish that we would have gone to, I don't know, Utah Valley in my case, where I'm from, where home prices went from $300,000 to like $800,000 in the space of like 2010 to 2018. Wish I would have gone. I also wish I would have bought Dogecoin, not because it was valuable, but just because I could have made a ton of money.
Yeah.
So always easy to look back and think that you're a genius in an environment where everyone looked like geniuses, but that could be coming to an end.
It's gonna change. How much it changes will be interesting, and how much I think technology affects it will be interesting, and how much I think people we should wrap this topic up. But for years, right, people never bought cars, without like a dealer, and then like Tesla came along and like some of these other car dealerships, and now you just like buy it online, right? Like you don't go and haggle. Like there's not like the same sort of so like home buying could become something like that in the future, though it'll probably be like a small subset.
Probably does. Yeah. So anyway, I think there's always gonna be a place, like I said, for if you are a realtor, get really good at what you do. Be a concierge as much as you are if a facilitator or a broker, and I think you'll do just fine.
Yeah.
All right. I think we'll probably shelf the stock discussion. I think we could probably go in a little bit further into that. Maybe we can do that next week, the airline one. But wanted to talk a little bit more about the topic du jour. and discuss with a lot of veterans that are questioning, as I'm getting out, we've been talking a lot about conferences and mentorship programs. Let's first talk about the things you shouldn't do very quickly, and then offer some good tactical advice for people that are listening, that are going to their MBA programs, that are a year out from transitioning and are wondering if I shouldn't go to a networking conference and pay $1,000 for the chance to sit amongst other people that don't know what they're supposed to be doing. What should I be doing? So first, maybe this is the last bit you'll offer, because I think we've probably, hopefully, let everyone know kind of what the reality is here. But why shouldn't I go and spend $1,000 to go to a conference, just to go to a conference? Or what's the point of a conference?
I mean, having attended some of these conferences, I'm not really sure what the point of them is. Like, basically, it's like if you took the entire, it's basically like commercializing the first 3 months of your MBA program, where they like go and really like hit on you. I mean, man, the first 2 months of like, hey, here's like everything you can do with careers or whatever. And then, so people go and they listen to that, and like a lot of them, they're already in MBA programs, at least as my experience when I've gone to these sort of things, right? Because it's like selection bias, right? Like they're in big cities, you have, a lot of people there who are like nearby, and they're usually in like an MBA program. So like, I mean, there's a million other things you could do. You could go network with folks, right? Like on your own. You could, go to like a hiring conference. You could, there's a lot of free resources out there, like free communities now out there that don't require you to like go. There's all these like Slack groups and like chat groups. We have our Discord, right? And there's also just more literature out there. You could also just like read a book too, like there's like books out there about military transition, like the one that the CEO of Service to School does, like Breaking Business
Yeah,
School.
Alec Emmert's book. Yeah.
Yeah, you could just read that book and accomplish literally everything, that you would ever learn at a conference in that book.
I think a lot of vets too, and this is a topic that I wanted to address, because in your professional life, conferences are a big part of any industry. If you're ever part of a sales organization, or you're ever part of a marketing operation, conferences are a massively beneficial way to market your product. But as you're coming out, you see conferences. I think we've all been walking downtown when there's a conference, and people, I think, misunderstand how to even go to a conference, right? If you're interested in a topic, conferences do present you with a way to network. And if you're very diligent and you arrange meetings, the people that I know that best do conferences figure out who's going to be at the conference. They have their time blocked off. They have meetings with people. They introduce themselves to, they figure out how to leverage those networks.
Like it's a time to like basically like do business, right? And like just avoid, like for industry conferences, right? It's like, Kelly, everybody's going to be here. We're going to set up a bunch of meetings and talk, and we could even like be the culmination of like, some sort of like business negotiation that's going on that has been going on a while, or like prospect for new business, right? That's how I've seen conferences used when I've gone to conferences.
It's like a sales tool, or if anything else, you use it because the people there have knowledge. When you're going to a conference full of other transitioning veterans,
there's not that level of mix that's going to be there.
No, not at all. So and
it'd be great if there was like, if it was like a marketplace, right? But those are job fairs, and that's not what these things are. And job fairs are incredibly difficult to put on and require extensive planning and commitment. So
job fairs are incredibly difficult. You have to be able to convince the companies that you're going to be able to deliver them people. I mean, it's a network, right? Both sides, or a platform rather. It's both sides have to determine that there's value in kind of a chicken or egg type thing, and then you have to negotiate the price. Are you going to pay per candidate, per booth?
Yeah,
those are hard. It's a lot easier just to get some speakers together, and that can be fine if you have, very interesting people that you can come and derive a benefit from. The other issue for vets is that the vet network generally already exists. You don't need to like create your network
Yeah, you know,
among
yeah,
veterans.
you can just call people. You can just like see
Right.
what local organizations are in your area, or you know, there's so many more vets in business than there used to be, and most of them are pretty friendly, and they'll provide. You can just like pick and choose, like, hey, what am I interested in? You know,
I
and get an education once you kind of get like a baseline level of like what's out there um via you know, online tools like books, websites, you
yeah.
know, like chat rooms.
Veterati is one that
Yeah.
I've seen. Service to school. There's like these mentorship opportunities that are generally free. I mean,
I think, yeah,
people.
you just want to avoid paying for stuff. I don't understand the point of paying for this sort of stuff. Like, it's such a commitment to do, and like the ones I've been to, like you have like people who are like super like advanced in their careers, and like I also don't feel like they give like good advice to like transitioning vets. It's like you know, like they're not like it would just go over their heads. Like some of the stuff I've heard, I'm like, okay, like this isn't going to mean anything to this group of people, which is
Yeah.
why veterans are so good when they go to MBA programs, because they basically get to like start back at square one and learn about something from the ground up.
Yeah. I mean, you go to somewhere. I've said that too. Like the best guest speakers that I've had while I've been here at Wharton haven't been like people that are 30 years out of their career.
Yeah,
It's
like there's
people that
like
are like
yeah.
5 to 10 years out.
Yeah, like I almost feel there's like very little value in like marquee like CEO, you know, like you just there's nothing like you don't learn
They
anything.
can't say anything either. I mean, they're public. We've
They're
had public
public
CEOs come and they like they like read their 10K, right? They like pull it up, and the 10K, for anyone listening that's not aware, it's like your public stock filing that like details
Yeah,
your
I know.
strategy, and they're not going to say anything else. It's like when generals would come to West Point.
Yeah, it's not
And
you aren't gonna hear anything groundbreaking.
no, and nor were you going to be like, man, you know, I now understand how to lead a platoon, because it's like, you know, I'm sure General Jones or whoever was like, they were probably fantastic officers in their time. But it's like you haven't been a platoon leader for 40 years, and the
Yeah.
realities of platoon leadership or
What you need is somebody to be like, what career you're interested in, here's how you get into it, and here's who you like, here's like the actionable steps and like the education you need to go do it. And I just feel like when you go to these career conferences, it's you know, you have all these clueless, you know, or not clueless, they're transitioning military officers there, you know, or they're in MBA programs, and there just isn't like you just like they all kind of like they're just sitting there and it's getting lectured at, and like there's no like active like learning involved, or you know, there's no networking to like, you know, be able to further your career.
And it makes more sense when you actually look at the reason that some of these conferences exist, largely to try to find deal flow or try to legitimize themselves to companies. And so you have to realize, if you're going to this and you're wondering how the people I mean, the people aren't organizing it out of charity, right? It's way too hard to be doing that. These aren't students. This isn't a university where students are hoping to get.
Well, it's like I remember when I got out and I was like super trusting of like every like other vet you met, because you're like, oh, this person gets me, they used to do my stuff. We don't realize that like now you're out in like the real world where there's, you know, a lot of economic incentives to do something, and like people aren't doing anything just for like the goodness of their heart, you know. So like there's so like what does this person want from me, or like why are they doing this, like how am I helping them by coming to this thing, you know. Sometimes it's pretty obvious, right? Like say you go to a hiring conference, it's pretty obvious like where everybody's winning at the hiring conference. I think it's less obvious where everybody's winning when you go to one of these conferences, right? And you're, you know, you're gonna like pay money to go there and spend all this money and hang out and like listen to some speakers, but like at the end of the day, like what are you gonna come out of there with like an actionable plan or like job offer? Like no, like you're just gonna be like, oh, I could have watched YouTube and gotten that.
Yeah, knowledge, going and paying. I mean, paying for a conference for $150, buying a plane ticket, staying in San Francisco or New York,
paying for like drinks and food, and like just the pain in the ass, like being away from your family.
It's $1,000 plus easily.
Like I did
so all
doing that, yeah, for like the Service Academy Career Conference, but anything
Right.
else.
You're basically investing in a new job. And all this to say, like, this isn't to say, like, if you're clueless and you really don't know what you want to do, which most vets and frankly most civilians I talk to don't, like, there's kind of this myth of like you figure out what you want to do when deep down most of us are still thinking like, okay, I'm going to figure that out later. But
Everybody's figuring out the career,
don't try. This also is not to say don't schedule a call with someone and ask them things that you can find out. So go read a book. Go, get a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. Like, it's pretty inexpensive. If you're a student,
go read Poets and Quants. Like that was
just go read it for like a few months. Once you get it, like, stop reading it. Go on like to Reddit, but then reach out, DM 30 people, 40 people, like, just have 20-minute calls and be like, hey, I've kind of done baseline research about what you do, whether it's customer success or whether it's industrial management or private equity operations or whatever. And like, most people will take 20 minutes and if you have thoughtful questions and try to determine like, hey, would these people be the people I'd want to work with? That to me is much more effective. If you're not getting a job from a conference,
it's like the illusion of forward movement. Like, you go there and you think you're like doing something, but in fact, all you're doing is spending money and like hanging out in a room with a bunch of people. Like, it's not.
And it's like people that, like, you're going to meet them and they're not going to add your career, right? Once you're in industry, go to conferences, find deal flow, close deals, meet people that can like help you achieve your company's strategic objectives. You're a transitioning veteran. Like, you're not used to, like, you're not valuable to anyone except an employer. So you also have to think about that. Like, you're not going to go to a conference and have someone come up to you and be like, wow, give me wisdom, right? It's going to be a bunch of that. Like,
or I'm going to give you a job, right? Like when you go to like these hiring conferences, right? Like the whole, like, maybe interviews come out of them, right? And these are like things that are specifically targeted to match employers with, folks looking for a job. And even then it can be like touch and go. Like sometimes you'll see like interviews or job offers handed there, but, a lot of the times not.
Yeah. And so, if anyone wants you to pay for that, if anyone wants you to pay $2,000 and they're a second-year MBA student to, read your essays, also don't do that. I mean, you can get on Leland and find like Harvard students and Wharton students for like $40 an hour. So watch out, because there are vets, not all vets are, exactly what you'd hope they'd be, as much as we'd like that to be the case.
Yeah. See some shady stuff out there, but
so, all right, Kyle. Well, next week we have our stock discussion, and we can go deep into economic valuation models. Methods.
We can talk about the stocks and the present value of future free cash flows and the metrics to make that valuation.
So anything else you want to share with people? Code to buy your daughter's Girl Scout cookies?
No, I think we're done with that. If there was like some huge prize at the end, like you could get like a Mary Kay like Girl Scout car, I think maybe I'd be more like pushing that, but no.
You can write off $30 on your taxes.
I don't think I can write it off. I think it's literally just me giving money to the Girl Scouts. So
it's
yeah, no. I if anybody's been watching Masters of Air, watch that. It's like such a humbling show.
It's insane. It like, yeah, you watch that. Yeah, those guys were insane, man. They just they had no fear, or they did have fear, and they just knew that they were doing something that was way bigger than themselves.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'd probably go with the latter, because I don't see anybody could not be scared doing that stuff. So
we'll talk to you next week, Kyle.
All right, sounds good. Appreciate it. Thanks, Wyatt.
And I'm not talking about some $400,000 a year working Wall Street stiff, flying first class and being comfortable. I'm talking about liquid. Rich enough to have your own jet. Rich enough not to waste time.